to this webinar session where we will discuss express route optimization and best practices that empower you and accelerate your business goals with Microsoft Azure. Before we get started, just quick housekeeping. We ask that any questions be put into the chat window. Everyone's going to be on mute, and we will answer the questions at the end of the presentation as time allows. We'll do our best, but we will be following up with you directly. So I want to thank the Microsoft team and the Azure Ninjas for enabling this joint session today. Together, Microsoft and Equinix are helping our customers transform their digital business. And digital transformation is a fundamental business driver. It also is not a point in time, but an ongoing process. And what we've seen benefit our joint customers time and again is that a strong digital foundation enables the speed, the flexibility, and the control points required for today's enterprises to adopt cloud. So the Equinix and Microsoft teams work extensively together to bring our customers proven methods to connect to Azure, bringing unique solutions to fit your specific environments and stage in your cloud journey. So what we love about working with Microsoft is that they consistently demonstrate their interest in the customer's holistic, hybrid, and multi-cloud environment. They truly have their customer's best interest in mind at all times and understand that network optimization is important to consuming their cloud services. And that makes our partnership a perfect fit and the solutions to you even better. So without further delay, I would like to introduce Chad Arnold, Director of Sales in the Pacific Northwest, and Josh Sordelay, Solutions Architect, to run through the agenda that you see on your screen right now. Gentlemen, take it away.
Hey, thanks so much, Todd. Chad Arnold here, Director of Sales for Equinix up here in the Northwest, and appreciate that intro. It's great, kind of level set of what we've been doing. Obviously, as you see on the screen there's a couple key things that we want to walk through. Certainly, things that we're seeing from the Equinix vantage point, into uniquely private interconnection, really what our strategy is, and specifically what we're doing uniquely with Microsoft with regards to express routes in the field and how we're solving for these customer challenges. We'll walk through a couple interconnection use cases, a couple different patterns that we see that are just logical steps to follow for customers that are trying to solve for these things coming from different vantage points, a couple case studies, a highlight of our professional services org, and really what everyone on the line, whether a customer, a partner, can leverage to help engage with us to really make these things a reality. So to kind of kick it off, I like to start foundationally thinking about really, who are we and why, why are these interconnections that we're helping the enterprise make important? So it really is a little bit of a history lesson, and I'm not going to belabor this, but I think you kind of have to look back a little bit to understand where we are. If you look back to a time in the late 90s when there was no efficient framework for the internet to grow, all of these unique networks were building out in different areas with no logical framework to do that. There was a real need for those unique operators to be able to interconnect in a neutral manner, to be able to share traffic. So our first customers as Equinix were the networks. And that kind of looks, if you look at the name itself, we are the equal neutral internet exchange. Equality, the neutrality there is critical for us. So really, those were our first customers. And really what built from there, if you kind of look across this chart on the screen, what began as a logical framework to allow the internet to scale, it really grew into multiple ecosystems, not just network to network, but you think about all the electronic trading, not just in the financial space, but in the ad space, where these operators needed to trade and to do business in nanoseconds, not milliseconds of latency. Those ecosystems started building out within Equinix, and I think that's really when Microsoft took a look at the broader ecosystems, where should we place these on-ramps? If we're building these unique compute regions globally, where is the most optimized physical location for us to place the Microsoft Enterprise Edge? And when they surveyed the landscape and realized that almost 97%, 96.4% of all global internet traffic flows through Equinix, that it's a very logical step to place those enterprise edges within Equinix to allow direct private connectivity through express routes anywhere in the world where those compute regions reside. So you think about, if you look at kind of the chart here, what this has allowed in our history is now we're able to put the enterprise consumer in the middle of this ecosystem. So what used to be the networks at the core of this consumption model, we now allow customers, enterprise customers, to sit in the middle of this massive interconnected ecosystem. And that's obviously grown over the course of 20 years, but that's the conversation that we're having with customers today. And just a quick highlight of what those ecosystems look like. This is kind of a nice little, your classic NASCAR slide here, but it represents, it's every network that you might consider, whether that's a terrestrial provider, a wireless provider, satellite provider. They all fit inside this ecosystem in pure traffic. And then obviously the enterprise space, being the most recent, addition for us, is growing at a rapid pace. So it's just a great highlight of where we are now and where we came from. And finally, I think this is really, when you think about, what Gartner says and what Forrester and 451 Research say about what's happening, what's causing these trends, it's all about, the digital transformation that enterprises are going through. The need to support these real-time interactions for things that may not have a few years ago required that same real-time performance. The ability to consume resources and analyze data in a much more logical and much more real-time fashion, that's what's driving this. And it's the scale of the enterprise as it grows, the ability to distribute your security, your data sovereignty, and support the type of commerce, the type of trade that is occurring for enterprises today. And I think that's really where, when you think about that all occurring within Equinix, we took a very broad brush approach to creating an index that actually surveyed not just all of the private interconnections occurring within our facilities, but all of our peers' facilities. There are other places where these private interconnections are occurring, and the goal was here to understand how much faster are these private interconnections growing versus the growth of the public internet. And based on the needs that we just walked through a moment ago, we found that this is actually growing at a pace almost 5 times faster than the growth of the public internet. And it's expected to grow over 45%, to 5,000 terabytes per second over the next, year or so here. And that really is a very big juxtaposition when you think about how enterprise customers have built out their networks, whether that's through internet access, MPLS networks. There's a dramatic shift away from those types of connectivity into this private model. And really, that's where I'm going to hand off here to my global solutions architect, Josh Shortelay, to walk into a little bit deeper detail around the strategy between us and Microsoft for ExpressRoute.
Hey everyone, this is Josh Shortelay with Equinix. I work with Chad here in the Pacific Northwest, supporting many of our customers as they walk down their cloud journey and look specifically at ExpressRoute and how that can help benefit them. To kind of dovetail on what Chad had said around what Gartner and the other analysts are saying, interconnection really seems to be at the heart of what we're seeing transform for business happening at the digital edge and at the digital frontier. Getting closer to your providers, eliminating the disruptions and the uncertainty of the internet is really the future of how we're going to go about consuming platforms in the future and where we're going to do them tomorrow. What we've seen through our deployments that Chad talked about is that proximity and that density has enabled us to put a strategy together where customers like yourselves can build that digital edge adjacent to the Microsoft Enterprise Edge nodes for the on-ramps to ExpressRoute so that you can optimize that connectivity to your resources that are in Azure in a way that allows you to treat Azure as though it's your own data center. The latency between the Equinix Edge and the compute within Microsoft, depending on market, is oftentimes less than 10 milliseconds, which affords you a lot of opportunities to do things like cloud-adjacent storage or legacy leave-behind applications operating in a cloud-adjacent hybrid manner so that you can begin to explore new and safer ways of migrating off of those legacy platforms. What we see customers starting with at first is solving for the physics, solving for the latency, getting from their current data center premise to that digital edge, to a performance hub at Equinix, which is simply a rack with a routing edge so that they connect to our Cloud Exchange Fabric in order to establish a VLAN to the express route connectivity to Microsoft. This affords customers the speed to do it at their leisure and not be beholden to the deployment times that are often associated with the networks and how they go about implementing express route solutions. This enables a customer to be in charge and use the networks for what the networks have been great at, transit and transport and getting packets from one site to another, and then taking control of their own destiny as they look to leverage solutions from Microsoft or from other SaaS providers that might also be available on the Cloud Exchange Fabric. Furthermore, this establishes a real security demarcation point that allows the InfoSec and risk analysis teams to look at this solution in a way that's much less skeptical and far more supportive, because it eliminates the risk vectors that are associated with the internet and keeps things constrained to the private network. The Cloud Exchange Fabric and ExpressRoute itself is kind of how Microsoft kicked off delivering ExpressRoute early on, was in partnership with Equinix through our Cloud Exchange that allows them to aggregate those customers' connections. Customers connect to the Cloud Exchange Fabric and build a VLAN to Microsoft over that ExpressRoute. There are two kinds of connections that you get when you connect to ExpressRoute. One is the IaaS or Microsoft Private Peering, which is where you'll receive your VMs and your other workloads of that nature. The Microsoft Public Peering is where you're going to peer for things like Dynamics or SQL Online and blob storage and the platform as a service elements of what Microsoft has to offer. Office 365 can be a part of this, but that's a conversation you're going to need to have directly with your Microsoft representatives to find out whether or not you as a customer meet the criteria required for that sort of connectivity specific to Office 365. What this enables is a high bandwidth, low latency, secure and private connection to your Azure resources as though they were in the server room down the hall. The way that Equinix is deployed with Microsoft is that we have more of the ExpressRoute on-ramps than anyone else in the world because of that density that we've got. That's not to say that ExpressRoute on-ramps aren't at other providers. They are. Microsoft would not bet their entire basket on one provider, but the overwhelming majority of those on-ramps are within Equinix facilities globally. What we've done is connected all of those Cloud Exchange nodes globally to one another to allow customers to build backbones on demand between geographic locations or between metros within a geo, or you could choose to leverage Microsoft to do the same thing, to leverage the Microsoft backbone to transit between these geos and then step out of the Microsoft at the Equinix on-ramp back into your own private network. It affords you a high degree of choice and agility when it comes to figuring out how you're going to go about deploying a global or multinational solution. So Chad's going to go ahead and walk us through some interconnection use cases real quickly, and we can talk more specifics during the question and answer period later.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I think I like to think about there's a couple different places where customers choose to meet us, and I think the reality is there's customers that we've worked with, with Microsoft that were born in the cloud. They had never had owned or managed a server in their lives. There are others that are coming from the other end of the spectrum, right? From a very legacy data center facility environment, and they're trying to figure out how to rationalize that footprint, begin to use more compute resources within Microsoft or other clouds. And it's really, we can meet customers wherever they might be on that spectrum. And I love this slide because it really highlights, I would say in a distilled fashion, where and when we're actually engaging in these conversations. So if you're a customer out there or a partner and you're thinking about how to solve for these challenges, foundationally, if you're in that legacy scenario, you've got multiple, MPLS networks in place, you're consuming over the internet. Before you really begin to do big things and important things in the cloud with your enterprise, you really want to consider the network first. And we'll walk through a little more of why in a few slides from now. But it's all about solving for latency. To Josh's point, figuring out that foundational layer first is going to ensure your success in the cloud. I think that's the best way to put it. But also find the right balance. We think about hybrid and multi-cloud. For me, that really just simply means what's the right balance of both my on-premise and virtualized environment. We find as customers go through this journey, they might have a goal of going 100% cloud in a certain amount of time, and they realize, maybe 6, 8 months down the road that there are certain things that might not ever be able to be virtualized. And that ability to have something adjacent to the cloud where you're still able to leverage compute resources within Azure or other clouds gives you a lot of flexibility that you might not have known existed. Obviously, being able to, in a very adept manner, distribute your security in whichever format makes sense for you. Maybe you're going to put your firewalls inside of Azure. Maybe that's something you want to maintain control over. All of those things can be done within your own control inside of Equinix. And obviously, with our joint global distributed footprint, you really are able to distribute data in a very logical manner that you simply can't do other places. And I think that's really what's made our partnership with Microsoft so strong. So I think this slide really, for me, is kind of the inception point of it. It's a term that we've kind of built here at Equinix called the interconnection-oriented architecture. But for me, it's a framework. It's a subway map, if you will, as to how an enterprise should think about addressing their cloud journey. What does that cloud migration framework look like? Understanding what are my goals. Is my goal to migrate everything? Maybe there are certain things that I want to maintain control over. It's understanding what are those priorities and then really building that framework from there. It's all about simplification. I think this is the key on the network side. There is no one size fits all. And what we really see being built is our networks that are simplified, but also hybrid. It's a blend of what maybe you have in place. Maybe there are components of MPLS that will never go anywhere. But it's leveraging new and different topologies like Ethernet private lines and SD-WAN to help really create that future state that optimizes what you're doing. Create the right security guardrails around that network, establish that data fabric, and really determine where are those optimized intersection points that allow you to optimize latency, distribute globally, and find the value on the right-hand side of this chart that's being highlighted. So this is the official subway map, and this is kind of our IOA interconnection-oriented architecture blueprint. But once again, from left to right, starts foundationally from that network layer into the security layer, moving into data and then applications. I think a lot of times we meet with customers and they get very excited about the very cool things in the upper right quadrant of this slide, and they forget to actually think about and establish that network blueprint first. If they start to try and consume these applications on the right-hand side without having solved for those legacy networks first, that's where the gotcha is going to occur. And by the way, when we end this, if there's any questions that come up in this presentation, feel free to type them into the chat window. At the end of this presentation, we should have some more time for Josh and I and the team to address anything that might come up.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
So really, I mean, one more highlight here, and this is key. So we've established a repository of really data, just data that's all around. We've scrubbed all the brands out of it. We scrubbed the networks out of it. It's all about use cases that you can leverage to go build on for your challenges. It's called Interconnection Oriented Architecture Knowledgebase.com or IOAKB.com. Definitely recommend checking it out. But this is the repository that we guide our customers to depending on what they're trying to solve for. So the case studies that I wanted to highlight today, before I hand it back over to Josh, are a couple that I've actually been very personally kind of invested in some cases, and I think it's worthwhile kind of just taking a moment to walk through what their challenges were and what we solved for. So the first is PCL Construction. This is a Western Canadian construction company. It was actually one of the very first Azure Express Route consumers in Western Canada. And they were coming from that legacy environment. They were trying to figure out how do we rationalize and right-size all of these legacy footprints and go to a zero data center policy where we're now leveraging the cloud for all of our enterprise needs. And obviously, Chris Palmer, manager of their advanced technology services there, gave us a great quote in that, we did allow them to dramatically reduce their latency and improve their connectivity to Azure for all of their global users. And I think the stats here on the next slide will help articulate that. So for PCL, this is a global company. By distributing their on-ramps with us, they were able to cut their latency down by almost 60%. That dramatically improved their time to market. And I think when you think about what that looked like before, previous to leveraging Azure through Equinix, it was an 8-week project delivery time frame to be able to procure gear. They were able to reduce that to 4 hours after that occurred. So that was a massive acceleration for their ability to spin up and order gear for these sites. And then obviously for them, it was a massive cost reduction. As they started to collapse and right-size these facilities, it dramatically reduced both OpEx and CapEx, saving them almost $500,000 a year. And then Devon Energy. Devon Energy is one that had a big server migration in front of them, and by leveraging a blend of not only our distributed architecture to accelerate and optimize their express routes into Azure, they also leverage our professional services team to help keep that project on rails. And that's a really important, just foundational point, because that team that they worked with is kind of a ninja squad, and we'll highlight what they do in a moment. But we work very much in concert with the Microsoft team to keep these things on track. And I think that's really where, for the Microsoft team that we worked with here, they had a very specific, the Devon team that we worked with, it was a very specific time frame that they had to make that migration occur, and we kept that project on track. So obviously, multiple factors here: network optimization first, the ability to execute within timeframes. And I'll pause because this is something that I would say every single one of our joint Microsoft and Equinix customers is dealing with. They've all been given some sort of directive. Maybe it's 12 months, maybe it's 24 months, but these are generally aggressive timeframes to begin virtualization. And if you don't have the right solution in place that allows that project to stay on track, that is where timeframes are missed. Jobs are lost in some cases, and we really want to help avoid that. When we've done an assessment with the Microsoft team around how much faster we're able to deploy express routes, in contrast to some of the other partners in their ecosystem, the average network service provider delivered express route is just around 8 to 9 months between circuit delivery and then routing established into Azure. With us, the average is 6 to 8 weeks. And that is a massive differentiator when it comes to how we help deliver on these projects. So really, next steps, I'm going to hand this over to Josh here for a moment to kind of highlight our EPS team.
So with next steps in terms of what Chad was talking about in the network optimization, the Equinix Professional Services team has been working in conjunction with Microsoft to conduct what we call cloud optimized WAN and return on investment analysis workshops, where we sit down with customers like yourselves and take a look at up to 60 sites and analyze what you're spending on that WAN spend today, what other services are available at each of those sites, and how much money could you save if you were to deploy an interconnection-oriented architecture like we've been talking about and advocating here, in an effort to help those customers improve and establish that network path to consume ExpressRoute in a rational and sensible way, so that they don't end up doing things that are hard to architect around later. The EPS team is there to provide those guardrails and provide those bumpers on the lanes for the projects to ensure that there's the success from those of the team that have been doing this over and over and over in conjunction with Microsoft for many years. That way, when customers deploy, they deploy successfully. Their satisfaction rate with the Azure environment is higher, and the amount of consumption of the platforms that you're looking to use becomes easier for you to access. The results of that IOA workshop that I just talked about is a blueprint and a document similar to like what you see here. And I realize this is a bit of an eye chart and kind of hard to see, but this is taken from an actual customer who is spending quite a bit on their international WAN, and with the IOA approach was able to reduce that spend by $6.7 million a year and increase the end user bandwidth by 150% or more, and help improve the overall end user satisfaction and improve the accessibility to all of their resources and enable their ability to reach out into the cloud like Azure.
So one of the things that we definitely wanted to leave the entire audience with is the idea of what we're calling, it's a digital edge strategy briefing. So to understand really the unique nature of what this can mean to your business, it's really a blend of taking into consideration the very specific things that are occurring within your enterprise or your customer's enterprise, and weaving them into how this interconnection-oriented architecture can be achieved, and really what can accelerate and optimize that digital transformation and the business drivers behind it. So one of the things that our team is more than happy to collaborate with both yourselves and any one of our partners. I think that's the key as well. I know we have a lot of Microsoft partners that work with us on these solutions. We think about the partner community that you consume and leverage today for your Microsoft enablement. We work with those partners to create and deliver this content. So this is something our team and any one of our teams globally is happy to come out and do with you. But this is a customized session for your customers to really help unlock some of the power of these concepts that we talked about today.
So at this point, do we want to step out to the question and answer?
You bet. Let's see, are there any questions in the chat window?
Yeah, guys, so this is Todd again. I wanted to thank you both for the presentation. I think you guys punctuated nicely that the traditional WAN and data centers, they just weren't optimized for cloud workflows. And really the offer we had there at the end for the digital edge strategy briefing and also to engage on an IOA workshop is where we come in with our solution architects and take a look at your entire network and identify where there are cost savings, where perhaps your circuit strategies have kind of grown inorganically over time, and there's opportunities for you to save a significant amount of money that can literally fund your cloud projects into Azure through ExpressRoute. Mm-hmm. So we really are looking to optimize for those looking to adopt Azure, and then for those of you who are already inside of Azure, look for ways where we can optimize and improve. Guys, there have been questions going on in the chat window that our Global Alliance David Anderson has been answering on the fly. So I'm not sure if there's any additional questions right now, but we'll give it a second for folks to type into the chat window. And somebody told me once.
I saw a question around Todd. I saw a question around encryption, and no, ExpressRoute is not natively encrypted, though you could choose to encrypt that ExpressRoute with third-party solutions or IPsec encryption. We've seen people use third-party products to do that sort of thing if they need to encrypt that path. The speeds between Microsoft on the Cloud Exchange have always been up to wire speed, so the fastest speed that Microsoft supports, the Cloud Exchange will support. There is a different cloud provider that is not Microsoft that does have a speed limit, and that may be what you were referring to.
Yep. And I also see a question around today a presence in Western Canada. So today Equinix does not have a presence in Western Canada. And that's really based around the compute regions for all public clouds, as well as the density of networks today that it really exists as an on-ramp out of Toronto. But we are solving for, and this is key, most, I would say 95% of Western Canadian enterprise does not have the same data sovereignty concerns that some of the provincial customers do. They're on-ramping in Seattle as either a 2.7 millisecond route away from BC, around 17 milliseconds away from Alberta. So some very unique capabilities of getting an on-ramping in the best possible fashion to Azure right here in Seattle.
I saw a question around government customers. It depends on which of the Azure platforms you need to access. We've worked closely with a lot of state and municipal agencies here in the US and also up in Canada. And when it comes to the Azure GovCloud, if that's required, you can access that through the Cloud Exchange on a secure VLAN. So it would be an isolated VLAN for the GovCloud traffic. And then you could access the commercial cloud on another VLAN for commercial cloud platform access that you might need to use. What we've seen from these government customers is that not everything needs to run in the GovCloud. So it's important to identify those workloads and run the things in the Gov Cloud that need to run there, and run the things in the commercial cloud where you'll get a better performance metric.
So I had another good question from Matthew Carter out there. Why pick Equinix over other ExpressRoute companies? And I love this question because obviously there are a large number of ExpressRoute partners out there, right? So Equinix, number one, we are the largest ExpressRoute provider for Microsoft in the world. But for me, it's less about how many connections we're providing. It's about how we're providing those connections. So as we kind of walked through earlier, we're really focusing on, number one, being able to create the optimized connection point for those express routes, number one, reducing that latency, finding the right type of network topology to connect into Equinix to create that express route. But number two, once you establish that presence with Equinix, you're able to connect to any other cloud, any other SaaS platform, privately, on demand through the same platform. I think that's another really key point. And candidly, when working with Microsoft, they understand a lot of the needs of their customers aren't necessarily always going to be, through just with Azure. We see a lot of customers leveraging the right cloud for the right resources at the right time, and that is enabled through our capabilities through the Equinix Cloud Exchange Fabric.
And I also see a question around Microsoft making consuming Office 365 over ExpressRoute easier to implement and support. We don't work for Microsoft, so I can't speak for them as to what they may or may not be doing with the future of the Office 365 platform and it running on Teams, but I sure hope so.
Yeah.
Megaport question.
Oh, yeah. So Megaport. Yeah. So Megaport, interestingly, that's actually a great question. Megaport is a customer of ours. They are popped in many of our global facilities. They layer on top of our cloud exchange. And what Megaport, is doing is primarily serving a lot of the small and medium-sized businesses out there. They'll put POPs in a lot of third-party data centers. But primarily, from what I've seen, they're leveraging MPLS as kind of their connection methodology, which for many customers is just fine. But as we described earlier, it's not a cloud optimized connection methodology. It's not that deterministic path that you need to optimize your Azure experience. And I think Josh might have a few other thoughts to add there as well.
In addition to Megaport kind of layering on top of ours, where they're not as deeply embedded for the kind of co-sell and Microsoft joint sales prop type motions that we've got over 1,000. We got over 1,000 feet on the street. Megaports doesn't quite have that kind of sales force that can go out and do the same sorts of things that we can do. The digital edge strategy briefings that we spoke about at the end of the slide deck there is really an opportunity to have someone like Chad and someone like myself as a solutions architect come in and talk to you and your teams about how does your environment take advantage of these new trends and changes that are happening at the digital frontier, and how can we help you get there by leveraging the platform that we've built.
That actually brings one other point that I wanted to make that actually we didn't really cover so far in the training, and that's, so you think about the Microsoft partner community. These are partners of theirs that also enable Azure solutions, but whether that's hybrid or multi-cloud, partners like Cisco, like F5, like NetApp. There are almost 170 or maybe a few more now co-sell partners in that community that we leverage together between Microsoft, Equinix, and our partners that are on this call to help create the most savvy go-to-market solution based on what our customers are trying to solve for. And this is, I think, a very unique differentiator for Microsoft. That is frankly allowing them to find that right hybrid balance that we described earlier, where others might not be taking that same tack.
This is Josh. I see a question from Glenn Williams asking about the network optimization study, and does it focus primarily on data center to cloud providers, or are we also looking at endpoint access? So we're looking at all of them, not just your data centers, but all of your remote sites that you might be servicing today with IPsec VPN or really expensive MPLS links where they're only 1.5 meg, T1 MPLS links that you might be able to replace with SD-WAN type solutions that are more optimized for what you're trying to accomplish. So it really is a holistic view of what's going on in your network top to bottom and how can we help you reassess that and adopt an interconnection-oriented architecture.
There's a question about PCLs and network. What type of legacy network do they have?
Yeah, so PCL was coming from an MPLS network, and it was all homing back to a very centralized location, actually in kind of Western Canada. So you had all these global sites that were originally suffering latency from multiple sites globally. And by being able to kind of determine, number one, the Azure region where they wanted to consume resources, and thinking about almost kind of a heat map of where their end users were, or where their partners were, and where those resources that they needed to consume existed, they were able to optimize that latency. That's kind of how that latency reduction occurred and how that cost optimization occurred as well. I think, and it's actually worth mentioning, so you think about what we're transitioning from primarily to what we're looking towards. A lot of our customers are determining how to leverage SD-WAN and Ethernet private lines in these cloud optimization workshops to determine not only a way to optimize to reduce their latency, optimize cost, but also be able to change their consumption topologies at the same time.
So we had one other question that came up. The IOA workshop, the Cloud Optimized WAN and Return on Investment Analysis workshop for up to 60 sites. The cost for that is $25,000 US, and that again covers up to 60 sites and anywhere in between. And then I think Bob, you wanted to address the Azure Stack question.
Yeah, there was a question about Azure Stack. Dave Anderson provided a response here, but basically we have Azure Stack systems in a few of our data centers around the world. Here in Seattle, there's one in Paris, one in Sydney, a few other locations. And basically, it's the perfect environment to set up hybrid patterns, application patterns, cloud bursting to Azure, things of that nature. So, the types of use cases that Azure Stack is meant to address, we have the network, the optimized network to make those possible.
Yep. Just one other comment that I'll make around our partner community. I think we always talk to our enterprise customers about how do they like to consume. I mean, there's so many other players within their vendor support structure that might support, whether it's Azure or even other components of their cloud journey. And we, Equinix, in a lot of cases, become the foundational element to those larger solutions. And I highlight this because it really is the easy button for our customers to consume. So if you're a customer out there considering what this journey looks like, think about your partners. Think about who you already work with and might already have MSAs in place with that you might be able to leverage to consume this topology and create this digital transformation. So I highlight that because we do see that becoming much, much more prevalent in terms of how customers are choosing to build this with Equinix and Microsoft.
And I see there's a question out there from Scott Fast about connecting to Oracle and SoftLayer via our platform as opposed to doing it from on-prem resources. What these connections afford you to do is to get access to the IBM Direct Link or for the Oracle Fast Connect platform to then begin exploring migrations away from the legacy on-prem leave-behind platforms and into those cloud integrated platforms, or to bring those legacy leave-behind hardware platforms adjacent to Azure and run elements of that within Azure. The other thing that this affords you to do, if you think about the power of that common routing plane sitting on the Cloud Exchange, the ability to pivot workloads between one cloud or another becomes much easier, and you're much more agile and able to move those things in a dynamic manner. We had a customer that had a large commitment to the other big cloud here in Seattle down the street and needed to get 6 petabytes of data out of that cloud and into Azure. To do so over the internet was going to take about 9.5 months and cost them somewhere around $700,000 or more. With the Equinix solution using the Cloud Exchange, they were able to go 10 gig out of AWS, 10 gig into Azure, and move 6 petabytes out over the course of a couple of weeks at a total cost of about $70,000. It really enables you to use the right cloud for the right workload at the right time and not overcommit to any one particular way of doing things. It lets you take control of your destiny and what resources you're going to leverage at what times.
So the question on how much is the digital edge strategy briefing from Kevin Kim? So great question. That's free. We consider that to be kind of a pre-sales assessment that we can help work with customers. We do those all day long. There is no cost. So you let us know where and when we need to be. We will happily, bring the right resources to bear to set those up. And candidly, once again, we do those with partners. So if there's a partner that you're working with on these solutions, let's go in there together. It's great to be able to leverage all the information that might have already been built between yourselves before we arrive in this equation, and we want to leverage that to make that the most impactful session possible. Todd, what have we missed? What else is out there?
Guys, I think we're right on target. From a time perspective, lots of interaction, great interaction from people on the call. Really appreciate it. I think at this point, I would like to thank Microsoft and thank the folks who have attended and stuck with us. I see there's still 100 of you out there. To net it out, we look forward to helping you establish your digital edge and be able to directly access the edge node of Azure inside of our facilities, help you save money and foundationally continue your journey to leverage cloud services. We'll be following up with the digital edge strategy briefing and the opportunity to directly engage with us further. And I would open it up for Dennis or any of the Microsoft add some final closing comments. If not, I think we'll wrap it up.
Yep. Thanks, Todd. I want to thank everyone for attending the session today. We sincerely appreciate it. We want to thank our partners, Equinix, for the insightful and informative information. As was mentioned during the session, we will be posting the video of the presentation as well as text notes and additional information related to the session on the site mentioned, and I'm sure as part of a follow-up to those who did register, we'll get a notification out to you to make sure you know exactly where to access that content. We want to thank everyone for their time and attendance today, and we will now stop the recording, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.